All right. I speak pretty loudly to begin with, so I'm going to bring up the biological end of this, which we could easily cover in about 6 or 7 weeks. So I've got to narrow it down to some very minor or very short topics. And so I'm going to concentrate on Mounds State Park and the nature preserve that's in there. And my attempt is going to be to show you what you're going to lose should this reservoir be put in place. Being a teacher at Ball State, I can't take an opportunity like this to not teach. So you're going to get a little bit of background information to start with. So if you can go ahead and move the slide. Okay, wetlands in general, they have great importance to the landscape, and I just listed here some of them. They store water, they alleviate flooding downriver, they pollution control. If you have a nice wetlands, the pollution from farmers' fields actually gets filtered out before it gets into the river if you have wetlands prior to that. Recharge groundwater aquifers, and they reduce the greenhouse effect because they tend to be carbon sinks. They store carbon compounds, so it's not free to get into the atmosphere. Okay. They're also biological supermarkets for several reasons. They are where there's extensive food chains, great biodiversity of plants and animals living in these particular sites. They have unique habitats for animals and plants, flora and fauna, and they provide corridors that actually connect different wildlife sites, or at least places where they can stop before going to another and so forth. So that's the importance of these wetlands, okay? Now, what I want to do is just look at what's happened to the wetlands in Indiana. If you look at this particular map here, this was pre-settlement time, and you can see that in the lower 48, back then we had about 215 million acres of wetlands. Today, today being in the mid-80s when this study was done, we were down to 103, which means we've declined 53%. We've wiped out 53% of our wetlands in the country. Now, let's look at Indiana. Back at pre-settlement time, Indiana had between 5.5 and 6.5 million acres. And it was about 24% of our surface was in wetlands. Today, or back in the mid-80s, we were down to between 750 and 800,000 acres, which means we in Indiana have lost 85 to 87% of our wetlands. Obviously, this is an agricultural state. We drain them. We want to go out and we want to plant as much agriculture as we can. The result is that we are draining our wetlands. And it's only 3.5% now of our surface. So you go to the next slide. This map sort of puts it into perspective. The dark colors, red being Indiana, if you read the legend over there, 86 to 89% of the wetlands have been gone, have been disappeared. 2 states are worse than us, Ohio and California, but most states are much better than we are. Notice in the Midwest, the agricultural belt, this is where most of the wetlands have disappeared. Okay, this Indiana, if you focus then on Madison County right there, you'll see that Madison County only has between 5,000 and 10,000 acres of wetlands left. It's been drained quite heavily. Of course, the central part of Indiana is the Farm Belt, and you'll notice that whole central region across the state is where there are fewer wetlands than further north or further south. Okay, now what I want to do at this point, with just a little bit of background you have, is shift into a type of wetland generally called peatlands. Peat is partially decomposed organic material. And it can be quite thick or it can be quite thin depending upon the type of wetlands you have. In what we call peatlands, it can be up to 40 feet or 50 feet in thickness, so it can be quite a large amount of stored carbon material in the ground. There's 2 types of peatlands, fens and bogs. Well, bogs don't occur around here, so I'm going to concentrate on fens, and we do have one of those in Mounds. Okay, a fen, okay, they are the rarest of all wetland communities. Now remember, we only have 3.5% wetland acreage on the surface of the state now, and we're talking about 3% of that as at the highest being in fens. This is a very rare wetlands type. It's defined basically as a site where water wells up out of the ground. The water coming out of the ground is mineral laden. It has a lot of calcium and magnesium carbonate and sulfate, which means, if we go to the next slide, okay, and you go down to the bottom, it's going to be, rather than acidic, having an acidic pH, it's going to have a neutral to basic pH. It's a different type of wetland than every other type of wetland. And it's neutral to alkaline, as you see there, and the plants that grow there must adapt to and grow under these conditions. These are very harsh conditions for plants to survive in. And so as a result, if we move on, they're mineralotropic, but if you move on, the plants that grow there are called calciphils, calcium-loving plants. And if you jump to the bottom, fens have a disproportionate number of rare, threatened, and endangered plant species. Even in Indiana, this is where you're going to find the majority of these rare and endangered species in these very harsh habitats like that. Okay, so if we move on then. Now, at this point that you have a background of what a fen is, you recognize that this is Mounds State Park in this particular figure right here. If you'll concentrate, there's a little strip right there. I'm going to enlarge in the next slide that particular strip, and there you see it right there. That is the sedge meadow fen that we have at Mounds. The fen itself is actually down through this region right here. This is all sedge meadow up here and down here. And what makes this the fen part is that we also have marl. This is a type of soil that is basically calcium-heavy clay, and it has a whitish tint to it. And it's the part that's really where calciphils will concentrate and grow. And it is here that we're getting those rare and unique plants in more concentration than at other sites. Okay, so that is where the fen is right there. This is the White River running down the side over here. So you can see that, oh, and I also want to point out that this is the ridge right here that basically delineates the nature preserve. The water is going to come almost all the way up this ridge. So if we look at the next picture, you can see where the fen is going to be underwater. You're going to lose this entire unique habitat. It's going to be gone, and all the plants that are rare and unusual are going to be gone with it. So it'll wipe out that, and all you'll have left in the nature preserve is just this little ridge right here, sort of a fairly steep ridge, and then it flattens out into the fen area. Okay, next slide, please. Now, having shown you what you're going to lose as far as the fen, what I want to do now is step back and look at the entire park. So I'm calling this point 2. There have been 2 studies on the flora of Mounds. If anyone's interested, I have a copy of both of them. You're welcome to look through them. One was done in 1993 by Paul Rothrock and his crew, and they did the initial study of the plants there. And then Kevin Tungesvik has, through the years, kept a list of plants that he found that weren't on the original list. And when we got up to about 10%, which means we got up to about 45 species, then that's enough to go ahead and do an addition study. And so in 2011, we published, Kevin and I were the leading this study. We then went through the park and added another 129 species that had been missed in the first study. So altogether, when you take a look at this, next slide, please. Okay, what we find in this one site, there are 593 total species. This is very high for a site this size. Usually we're talking 350 to 400, but we're well over 500, almost 600 species in this particular site. Of that, 478 were native species, which means that about 18% or 106 were exotic. Exotic species are typically 23 to 25% of the plants you find at a site. So this site is very native in its makeup. It does not have the same outside plants moving into the site that we find typically when we do these type of studies. And then the numbers at the bottom, I don't have time to explain all of those, but that number that's called, or that letter that's called FQI, That stands for Floristic Quality Index. It's a technique that botanists use to describe the quality of a particular site that they've studied. To give you an idea, you'll get a number when you punch in the numbers into the mathematical formulas. To give you an idea, a 20 or less means that the site has virtually no value whatsoever. If you get up to 45, maybe 50, somewhere in that range, it means that there are some remnants of the past vegetation at the site, and it is noteworthy and worthy of preserving that particular site. When you get over 50, it becomes a site that is essentially pre-settlement. These are the plants that we had at this site before the European settlers got here. And the higher the number, the higher the quality of the site. When we look at mounds, we see the FQI is 96.2. That's definitely well above 50. So this is a site of paramount preservation. We need to really preserve this particular site. Now 96.2 may not mean anything to you. So if we go to the next slide, these are studies that I've done across East Central Indiana. And the first column is the native FQI. You'll see at the very bottom is Mounds State Park. And then you see on the very right column the counties that various sites that we've looked at occur in. And you can see that by a great margin, Mounds is a far better site, a higher quality site than any other site we've looked at. The only other site that comes close is a place in Randolph County called Cabin Creek Raised Bog. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's a 13 area, large fen, and it's 85 point something. So you can see Mounds State Park, the whole park, not just the fen, but the whole park, is an area that is distinctly and strongly should be preserved. We shouldn't be throwing a third of it into a reservoir and so forth. Okay, I think... Okay, so there's the summary. It's of paramount importance as from a regional perspective, and hence we should be saving it at this point. Okay, I think that may be it, yes.